Get out of here somehow. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to be here and speak to you today. I really appreciate that. My name's Fred Nicora. I live in Cedar Grove, Wisconsin. I grew up in southeastern Wisconsin in Wauwatosa. I moved all over the place, and I'm going to just kind of dive in here a little bit, give you my story. So my dad died when I was 32 from colon cancer. It ripped him down in less than 2 years from his original diagnosis. It was awful. I was considered high risk. So starting in 1990, I started receiving annual colonoscopies, which I didn't really appreciate, but I knew the necessity of it. I was considered high risk for colon cancer. My mother died about 4 years later, and as I was an only child, I felt alone and adrift, with the exception of my created family that I had myself. I had a wife and 3 kids. We were living in Minnesota at the time. We'd been up there about 10 years. I decided I was going to move back to southeastern Wisconsin just because I wanted to have my family allowed the privilege of being around extended family, know what family is. Family's important. But one night at a large extended family gathering of about 250 people, elderly aunt made a slip of the tongue and my world turned upside down. I found out I was adopted. I didn't know that before. And I didn't really understand how big a part of my identity, my birth story was, until it changed. And what I'm going to challenge everybody here to think about is think about your birth story, how that makes you, what part of your identity that is, how only you know that inner self. And that's what I lost that night. Now, the second swing of the wrecking ball came when I contacted the state of Wisconsin the following week. First of all, to find out, because my parents had passed away, so I had no way to really reconcile this with them, get any insight into it, try and figure out what was going on. So I contacted the state. First of all, are these people nuts, or is this true? And it was true. I was adopted. It explained a lot. If you looked at my parents at the time, it was kind of interesting. I'll say they looked like they could have walked straight out of President Zelensky's family. They were short, dark. They were Eastern European. My dad was 100% Romanian. My mom was primarily Polish and Hungarian. Growing up, I was tall, blonde with red highlights and blue eyes, and I never really could quite figure that out. I'd ask about it, and your dad had blonde hair when he was young, and then it all fell out anyway. I got all kinds of stories and interesting, comments about it. But a lot of it did make sense. Now, the second question I had for the state of Wisconsin after I found out I was adopted, who am I? Where did I come from? And that's when the wrecking ball hit. Because at that point, I found that, because the state spent the better part of an hour educating me, that as an adoptee, I had a different set of rules. The laws were different for me, and that I wasn't allowed to know that information. That information continued to be owned actually by the state and my birth mother. There was a process, and I can clarify on that. I went through the process, and I did have a successful reunion, and I'll say I'm grateful for that. I am grateful for that. But I'm going to say the process of going through that was worse than a Band-Aid being ripped off a newly, enacted wound. The initial process, you pay money, and then you wait time. The state gathers the information. They gather your adoption files, and then somebody in the building over at DCF goes through, reads your entire file, learns all about you, redacts whatever they don't want you to know, anything that would allow you to get a glimmer of who you are. Once you receive that, then you're eligible to write a letter to your birth mother explaining who you are and why you want to know who you are. You can send that to the state. The state will then call her, inform her of her rights, and her rights are that she can either accept or decline. If she accepts, you're allowed to see her original birth certificate. If she declines, you have to wait 5 years. You're eligible to write a second letter after that 5 years to find out who you are. If she declines at that point, it's terminal until she dies. You're not allowed to pursue through the state until she's actually passed away. Now, the problem for me was, since I didn't know who she was, as an adoptee, the only option is really to call back every month or two and find out, is my mother dead yet? Which quite honestly puts you in a whole different tier of who you are in society and how you relate to everybody around you. And I'm going to say that was the second swing of the wrecking ball. It hit me with Quite a shock. Also what I found, and it was hard to see it, my birth mother gave birth to me in 1959. She was pregnant in 1958. It was a terrible time for a woman to be pregnant and not married in our society. She was shamed big time. She came from a small town in southeastern Wisconsin, I'll say the Burlington area, and she was sent to Milwaukee to live in a work-wage home where she was a nanny until she gave birth. And after that, she really wasn't welcome back in her community, and she had to leave. She moved to Michigan, got married, started another family, who unfortunately, she didn't tell at the time that she had had a child prior to it, which complicated things a little bit. However, when I discovered her husband had passed away, and she did agree to release my record, and we did enter a reunion. We were in reunion for about 7 years after that until she passed away. And it was, I'd say, a good reunion. We both tried as hard as we could. I had 3 kids. Those were her grandbabies. She wanted to get to know her grandbabies. I mean, that was a big thing for her. That was important. Now, during the 24 years since my discovery, I mentioned, reunited with her. I've actually met 4 of my 6 half-siblings. 2 of them had passed away prior to my discovery. My father passed away prior to my discovery. But I did, I was welcomed by many genetic family members, and those are the family members of my roots. But more important about finding out about them and finding out who they were, I was finally allowed to know about me. I finally could actually find out who I was, where I came from, what my roots were. To know both myself down to the bone as well as on paper, because that's the part that was held for me. I ask you to remove the legacy of generations of shame and secrecy woven into Wisconsin's outdated and antiquated laws, and bring Wisconsin into the light of truth and transparency. At the time of my discovery in 2000, we kind of covered some of this. About 3/4 of the states had closed or restricted records. Today it's about 2/3, and I think Minnesota's in there too. Minnesota just opened up last year. Our laws had previously been patterned after Minnesota. They flipped theirs over. They saw there was an injustice there and decided it was time for a change, just to allow us to own our own who we are. This is who we are. This is my story. This is where I've been. And I'm still, quite honestly, today missing my first 3 months. The state has that. I'm not after that. Today I'm just after the original birth certificate. My story is unique, but the situation I have found myself is not. Please let all the people of the great state of Wisconsin live on the same playing field with equal access to their birth information. And by the way, there's no colon cancer in my family, anywhere in my biological family. I needed to be focused on heart, as I have recently found out I have significant coronary issues. Many in my genetic family had died early from heart disease. I wish I had focused on coronary care earlier. I don't have that chance now. Thank you. Are there any questions you have for me?
Thank you, Fred.
Sure.
For coming in today and sharing. I'm going to ask you the same question as I did with Diana and Karen. If you would be willing to share your testimony as well.
Yes, yeah, I'd be happy to.
A copy of it. I just want to make sure I heard this right in your testimony. Is it true you only get 1 chance after 5 years?
Yeah, you're initially, if you're declined your first time, you have 1 shot 5 years later. And after that, you have to wait till she dies. And you don't know who she is, so your only option is to call the state every month or 2, find out if your mother's dead yet.
So you can only do 2 inquiries?
Yeah.
Okay. Senator Kieski.
Thank you. Thank you, Fred, for sharing your story.
Sure.
My question is, so if you hadn't overheard or somebody slip of tongue, you wouldn't have ever known you were adopted?
That's a mighty big question. You know, and I'm going to give you a little, you know, and I'll try and keep it short, but a slice of, you know, I believe things happen for a reason. I think I've heard that said here before a couple of times, and I agree that's true. Coincidentally, the night before that gathering, I live close to Lake Michigan. I'm up in the Belgium Cedar Grove area right by Harrington Beach State Park. I was taking a long walk at night, and I was troubled. And I'm going to say, I didn't dive too far into it, but when I discovered I was adopted, a lot made sense. And it's not just the looks, it's the way you interact, it's the way you think. And as I met people that are of my genetic family, I saw this. And I'll say for the record too, I don't believe any adoptee believes they have a right to a relationship. I think they just have a right to know who they are. And that's why, if there's, let's say, a note on the file, do not contact parents, just like anybody else has any other, do not contact this person, I'd be happy to respect it. I just want to know where I came from. Where are these roots from? And that's really, what it is. So in answer to your question, what I have never known, what I was going to say, that night on the beach, I cried for help. It was a very emotional night for me. I was saying, what is wrong in my life? I knew something was wrong and I couldn't place it. Things didn't fit. And it was a struggle for me. And that next night I happened to find out. So it was interesting to find out that way. Would it have happened? I remembered several things along the course of my life that should have opened my eyes and made me aware. I'm going to say psychologically, I wasn't aware to be there. And if you think about the dynamics of a situation like, and my parents were good to me, don't get me wrong, I'm not bashing my parents. They gave me a good life. They followed a line that was, I'm going to say, some believed it held validity in 1959. The problem is it doesn't today, and that's really what I'm asking for, is to say update our laws to just treat us as equal. I don't know if I would have found out. Maybe somebody would have made another slip. It could have been. Maybe something else would have shaken out.
I guess my question with that is, then it sounds like because you overheard this or heard this, they shared this with you, then you were able to reach out to the state of Wisconsin and they were able to confirm it?
Yes.
Okay, so that's available to people.
You can get, it's confirmed, yeah. And actually, I was stupid, I'm going to say, or ignorant of the laws. So I initially reached out to the county because that's where birth certificates are kept. And that's when I hit my first kind of flag of, we don't keep your records here. Your records are in Madison. You'll have to contact Madison for that answer. So then I called Madison and ended up with DCF. And I'm going to say the people were kind. They weren't rude or anything like that. But that's a part of me they were holding, and holding from me. And I can't tell you the sense and feeling of knowing somebody's redacting your history before they turn it over to you. That other people are allowed to know your history, but you're not. It put me in my place. And I would hope the laws can maybe remove that tier. That's what I would ask.
Good story. Thank you, Fred.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it.
Up next, we have Renata Hornet speaking in favor.